Let's go in the vehicle. So this is the last test we're gonna do before we make a definitive call. It's starting to look like this vehicle is just gonna need a sensor, but we have to cover all our bases before we replace the sensor. So let's go to our lab scope. Okay, so the yellow trace and green trace will be our sensor signal. Our red trace is going to be 5 volt, and then blue trace is going to be sensor ground. So I'm going to turn the key on. So when I turn on the key, this red trace should go up to 5 volt if the wiring was correct, if what the wiring diagram told us is true. Okay, so right there, as you can see, our red trace went up to 5 volt. So that's good. So now I'm going to start the engine. So this is interesting. This one wasn't producing a signal before. Now it is. We might have to test drive this vehicle to see if this is going to drop out. Okay, so this is what we're supposed to see. This is what we were supposed to see. But remember, before we only had one square wave on the lab scope screen. I'm going to rev up the engine. Now, because we disconnected the electrical connector of the sensor a couple times, that could wake up the sensor also. Just that movement can cause the sensor to work. So now what I'm going to do is, let's back out. Let's go to the engine computer. Let's look at some freeze frame data. I want to see when this trouble code set, or what the computer was looking at when this trouble code set. Let me turn off the engine. Let's turn the key on. I want to see at what speed the vehicle was being driven when this trouble code set. We're going to go straight in the engine computer. So we have our two codes here. Let's back out. Let's go to generic functions, freeze frame. We might have to drive the vehicle and drive it at the speed at which the code was set, so we can get this sensor to act up. So it looks like when this trouble code was set, the engine RPMs was 1260. So let's look at engine temperature. So we were in open loop. So vehicle speed was 0, so the vehicle was not being driven. It was pretty much at idle. Okay, so vehicle speed says 0 miles per hour. And then let's look at engine temperature right here. So the engine was at operating temperature. So engine temperature was 221 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm gonna try to run the engine at these conditions, and then we're gonna watch the signal coming out of those two sensors. Okay, so I'm gonna get the engine to operating temperature. We're gonna rev the engine to about 1200 RPMs. We're gonna stay here in the shop to see if we're gonna get this to act up. So I'm gonna back out. So here's what we got. I'm gonna turn this off. Let's go to guided component test. Let's go to crankshaft. So let's back out here. Let's go to signal test. Let's go to view mirror. Okay. So I'm going to turn on all these traces. We're just going to be on the 10 voltage scale. So 10 volt scale. Let's be over here on the 50 millisecond per screen. Okay, so remember the yellow trace and the green trace are our sensor signal, and then the red trace is sensor supply voltage, so 5 volt, and then the blue trace is sensor ground. So let's remove this trigger. Okay, so now let's go to our scan tool. Let's go to the generic side of the scan tool here. So at this point we're almost done. I mean, this sensor is most likely dropping out, but I would like to see if we can catch this in the act on camera. So let's go to display current data. Let's customize this list. So I'm just going to look at a couple data pads. So engine speed, so fuel system. Let's look at engine temperature, vehicle speed. What else? So I believe that's it. We need engine speed, engine temperature, and vehicle speed. Okay, let's bring up our lab scope. Okay, so I'm gonna put our lab scope over here. Now let's start the engine. So as you can see, our sensor signals are right there. So everything looks good. So now I'm gonna increase the engine RPMs. Let's get the engine hot. So right now the engine temperature is 150. So the code set when the engine temperature was at 220. So I'm gonna increase the engine RPMs. Let's get the engine to operating temperature. We're gonna keep watching these signals over here. Let's see if we can get this sensor in the act. Now, one thing I don't really like is that the height of the yellow waveform is not the same as the green one. Actually, let me see. So this over here could be our problem, because the green trace and the yellow trace should both have the same height. Okay, so let me bring this up. If I turn these other channels off, so if we turn off the blue trace and the red trace, so these two should have the same height. I don't know why the yellow trace, let me pause this. I don't know why the yellow trace is actually shorter. See this narrow, wide, they should both be pretty much the same height. I don't know why the yellow one is short. It shouldn't be. Both square waves of the intake cam sensor and the exhaust cam sensor, both square waves should have the same height. I mean, as far as I know. Okay, so the engine is at operating temperature. Nothing is happening. So let's take this for a quick spin. Okay, I'm gonna put, let me see. So the check engine light is still on. I'm gonna put my scan tool right here. I'm gonna monitor the scope as I'm driving. So let's take this for a spin and see what happens. Now the traction control light also came on. So let's go on the road. Now as I'm driving, I'm also looking at the lab scope screen at the same time. So if anything catches my eye, I will let you guys know. Okay, so we're gonna get on the road. So everything still looks the same. So far everything looks the same. So as I'm looking at the lab scope over here, this is what I see on the lab scope. Okay, so I'm gonna keep driving. If I see anything strange, I'll bring you guys back up. I'm also looking at the lab scope screen at the same time. So our sensor signals are still there. Okay, so our square wave is there on the lab scope screen. The only thing I see is the yellow square wave being a little bit shorter than the green square wave. But rather than that, everything looks pretty good. Okay, so I'm gonna drive back to the shop. I'm gonna have to replace this sensor. I mean, this sensor is probably failing intermittently. Okay, now I don't know if this square wave being short is the problem. I'm gonna get a new sensor. We're gonna replace this sensor and see if this yellow square wave is gonna have the same height as the green square wave. I'm not really sure if that's a problem, but I mean, our signal is there, it's not dropping out. Okay, now the sensor could also be failing intermittently. It's probably not failing right now. It might fail at some point. So the wiring of the sensor is good. We don't have a wiring issue. Okay, so let's go back to the shop. I'm gonna get this sensor replaced. I'm gonna drive back to the shop. When I get back to the shop, I will bring you guys back up. I'm back at the shop. I'm gonna bring up our lab scope here. So we have the same thing that we did have before we went on a test drive. The only potential issue that I might see here is the difference in height between this yellow square wave and the green square wave. Our 5-volt reference is there. Our sensor ground is good. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and replace this sensor. I'm gonna turn off the engine. Let's go under the hood so we can get this sensor replaced. We are back here under the hood. I did get a brand new sensor from the Dodge Jeep dealership. So here is the part number of the brand new sensor. Okay, let me get this sensor out of the box. I mean, out of the bag. Not box, but bag. So here's our brand new sensor. So this side is the intake sensor and this side is the exhaust sensor. So exhaust position sensor on this side and then intake position sensor on this side because it goes in this way. Okay, so now we're gonna remove the old sensor. So we're gonna disconnect this electrical connector first. Oh man, it's so hot here. The engine is hot. I'm gonna disconnect the electrical connector of the sensor first. Okay, so the electrical connector has been disconnected. So now I'm gonna grab my T30 torque socket so I can undo the bolt for the sensor. So just bear with me here. I don't have enough room around here, around the sensor. So right now I'm undoing the sensor bolt. I have undone the sensor bolt, so now the sensor should just be able to come out. I'm gonna grab some needle nose pliers so I can pry the sensor out. So let's pry this sensor there. So here comes the sensor. So we have removed the sensor. Here is the old sensor. So I'm gonna get it out of the way. So here is our brand new cam sensor. So I'm gonna install this. It's hard for me to see back there. So basically we have to make sure that the sensor is lined up, and then the bolt screws in. Now you have to make sure that the bolt goes in smoothly. Okay, you don't want to force it. We're going to hand tighten it first. So we're going to tighten the bolt by hand all the way, and then we're going to use the ratchet to tighten the bolt. So that's good. Now I'm going to use my ratchet to tighten the bolt for the cam sensor. I'm sorry for the shaky camera here. My hand is touching the camera. All right, so that's good. The sensor has been replaced. So now I'm going to reconnect the electrical connector of the sensor. All right, so just like that, we now have a brand new cam sensor installed on the engine. So now let's go in the vehicle so we can verify our repair. So here's the old sensor. This is the bad one. So now let's go in the vehicle and start the engine. All right, so it is the moment of the truth. We have replaced the cam sensor. I'm gonna bring our lab scope here. Now remember this old waveform, the yellow trace was shorter than the green trace. I'm gonna turn the key on. So I'm gonna unpause this. I'm gonna turn the key on. I'm gonna start the engine. Oh, check this out, guys. Now the yellow waveform is the same height as the green square wave. Okay, so the yellow square wave is now the same height as the green square wave. So this is fixed, guys. Based on what I see on the lab scope screen, I can tell that this is fixed. This makes me feel happy because we can definitely see the fault. So look at what we had before. Okay, so look at the picture we have on my phone and this. So that sensor was bad. Okay, so the fact that these two waveforms now have the same height, we're good to go compared to what we had before here. Okay, so the yellow one was shorter than the green one. Okay, so if I turn these off, as you can see, actually both of our waveform now have the same height. So this is fixed, guys. Now let's see if the check engine light is still there. So check engine light is still on the dash. We're gonna have to erase the trouble codes, but I feel comfortable with this. Okay, so the fact that our square waves both have the same height now, we're good to go. This is fixed, guys, so we're good. I'm gonna turn off the engine. So let's clear the codes. Okay, we have cleared the codes. I'm gonna start the engine. Nice. This is good. This looks different from what we had before. So as you can see, the check engine light is off. So we're good to go, guys. This is fixed. I don't even have to test drive this. I can already end this video here. It's getting late. I'm going to go home. I'm gonna end this here. This is fixed. Okay, I'm gonna pause this. I'm gonna leave this over here. This is fixed. We're good to go. So the issue on this Jeep was a defective exhaust cam sensor on bank 1. So I'm gonna turn off the engine so we can wrap up this video. As you can see, check engine light is off. We're good to go. I'm gonna test drive this in the morning and then I'm gonna deliver it to the customer. This is fixed, guys. I'm gonna leave this right over here. This Jeep is fixed. The issue was a defective exhaust camshaft position sensor on bank 1. We replaced the sensor. Now all is well. With the old sensor, the square wave coming out of the exhaust camshaft position sensor signal was shorter than the square wave that came out of the intake camshaft position sensor signal wire. So just looking at the two, I could tell that there was a difference there. The exhaust one was shorter than the intake one. We replaced the sensor. Now both square waves have the same height, which confirmed to me that the issue was the sensor. All is well. I feel comfortable delivering this to the customer. It's getting late. I'm gonna stop here. I'm gonna test drive this vehicle in the morning before I give it back to the customer. So I hope you like the video. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you don't like the video, give it a thumb down. But if you do, you gotta tell me why so we can make better videos in the future. If this is your first time here, subscribe to the channel. Ring the bell so you can get notified every time I upload a new video. If you have any comments, questions, criticism, leave them in the comment box. Thanks for watching. See you next time.